On December 7, 1941, Japan, like its infamous Axis partners, struck first and declared war afterwards. Costly to our Navy was the loss of war vessels, airplanes, and equipment, but more costly to Japan was the effectiveness of its foul attack in immediately unifying America in its determination to fight and win the war thrust upon it, and to win the peace that will follow.
After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States found itself in an alliance with the Soviet Union. Despite over 20 years of bad blood between the two countries, Germany was a much bigger threat to America and Russia than either were to each other. If Washington had refused to work with Moscow due to their past history of mistrust, Hitler likely would have won the war. Of course, the Grand Alliance did not survive the war's end, primarily because the ideological divisions between the two superpowers could only be brushed aside while they had a common enemy. The only way that partnership could have continued is if the Soviet Union's domestic and foreign policies had changed to be more acceptable to the United States. And that was never going to happen as long as Genocide Joe was in power.
The U.S.-led war on terrorism is getting at least verbal support from some among a one-time adversary, Iran. In Tehran this week, demonstrators held a candlelight vigil for victims of the attacks in New York and Washington, and Iran's foreign minister was quoted today as saying his government wants those behind the attacks, quote, tracked down and severely punished.
Given that Ayatollah Khomeini called America the Great Satan, Iran's response to 9/11 might come as a surprise to some of you. Thousands of Iranians participated in candlelit demonstrations mourning those who died in the attacks. Iranian President Mohammad Khatami condemned the attacks, and while visiting the UN General Assembly in November, asked to visit Ground Zero and pay tribute to the victims. Even the hardline Ayatollah Khomeini briefly suspended ritual chants of Margbar America at Friday prayers. When they returned, some jokingly chanted Margbar America Ye Aziz. I don't speak Farsi or however you say that, so if I got the pronunciation wrong, I'm well aware. Shut up about it, okay?
You're butchering my beautiful language.
These weren't empty gestures or limited signs of respect. A poll in 2002 showed that over 70% of Iranians wanted diplomatic relations with America restored. Parliamentarians, afraid of being caught praising the US before September 11th, were openly advocating just that. Drinking Coca-Cola in public became a political statement favoring reconciliation. Khatami had been elected on a mandate of détente with Washington, and Osama bin Laden had unintentionally given him a shot at making that happen.
George Bush, governor of Texas, will become the 43rd president of the United States at 18 minutes past 2 o'clock Eastern Time. CNN declares that George Walker Bush has won Florida's 25 electoral votes.
When Bush entered the White House, he didn't have a concrete Iran policy. By the time Al-Qaeda struck the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, Iran policy was still being reviewed by the National Security Council. Because Iran bordered Afghanistan, which was providing a safe haven to Al-Qaeda, and Iraq, which Wolfowitz refused to shut up about, it almost immediately occupied the minds of American policymakers. But because there was no established policy, the administration was divided. This division was best exemplified in the views of Powell, the realist, and Rumsfeld, the neoconservative.
Is it in fact true that we have made approaches to the government of Iran for help on that?
Iran made a rather positive statement for Iran. We have serious differences with the government of Iran because of their support of terrorism. But they have made a statement, and it seems to me a statement that is worth exploring to see whether or not they now recognize that this is a curse in the face of the earth. And of course, Iran has always had difficulty with the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
Powell wanted to use international cooperation against Al-Qaeda to strengthen America's relationship with Iran and other Middle Eastern powers, and use that momentum to hopefully end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The administration sent a message to the Swiss embassy in Tehran, thanking Iran for its support and asking for information about the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. On the other side of the aisle, improved relations definitely seemed possible. Khatami had convinced the Ayatollah that cooperating with the United States and Afghanistan was in Tehran's best interests, and Khomeini had authorized the government to consider the possibility of direct negotiations with Washington. Rumsfeld also hoped to strengthen America's position in the Middle East, but he thought the best way to go about it was to use 9/11 as an excuse to launch unilateral regime change wars across the Muslim world. You might already know that Rumsfeld wanted to invade Iraq less than 6 hours after the attacks, but Iraq wasn't the only country on his hit list. In addition to Iran, he also wanted to hit Syria, Libya, Sudan, and Somalia. Bush, a neoconservative himself, was sympathetic to Rumsfeld's view, stating in a National Security Council meeting held the night of September 11th that, quote, "This is an opportunity beyond Afghanistan. We have to shake terror loose in places like Syria and Iran and Iraq." But his decision to focus on Afghanistan first meant that Powell's view had its time.
As Operation Enduring Freedom begins, bombs rain down on Kabul and other targets, shaking the ground and lighting up the sky. Osama bin Laden calls it a war on Islam and threatens revenge. Tonight, what kind of enemy will U.S. soldiers be facing in a war against the Taliban?
The Taliban army is unlike any Western army, or indeed is unlike most armies which can be found in the developing world.
Why this may be one of America's toughest wars.
Cooperation between Tehran and Washington got off to a smoother start than one might have expected. Iran had been providing support to the Northern Alliance since it was founded in 1996 and almost gone to war with the Taliban in 1998. So once the United States began its campaign to overthrow the Taliban in 2001, the Islamic Republic was more than willing to help out. Tehran allowed American pilots in distress to land in Iran if they had to, agreed to let humanitarian relief supplies from the US be unloaded at Iranian ports and trucked into Afghanistan, provided targeting information regarding Taliban positions, offered to allow American transport aircraft to stage in eastern Iran to assist in operations in western Afghanistan, and American and Iranian special forces fought alongside each other in Herat. After the Taliban were driven out, Iran sent a delegation to Germany to participate in the Bonn Conference. The delegation proved to be very helpful, insisting on the establishment of a democratic government that would not harbor terrorists, and using its influence in the Northern Alliance to ensure compromise between competing leaders. The following month, in the Tokyo Conference, Iran pledged almost twice as much money to reconstruct Afghanistan as the United States. In March, Iran offered to house and train up to 20,000 Afghan soldiers. Cooperation in Afghanistan seemed to open the door for other issues in the Middle East, but the problem was that outside of Powell and the State Department, there was no interest in rapprochement. Prominent neoconservatives, including Rumsfeld, Cheney, Wolfowitz, and many others, remained committed to regime change in Iran, and worked hard behind the scenes to undermine any possibility of improved relations. America's Middle Eastern allies, in particular Israel, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, were also opposed to détente with Iran. The Saudis and Pakistanis didn't want any increase in Iranian influence in Afghanistan, while Israel feared that a more conciliatory US policy toward the Muslim world would lead to the creation of a Palestinian state. I can't possibly imagine why Israel's foreign minister at the time, Benjamin Netanyahu, would be opposed to a Palestinian state.
The inquiry concluded Israel has committed 4 of the 5 genocidal acts defined under international law. The intentional killing of a group, deliberately inflicting conditions designed to destroy it, causing it serious physical or mental harm, or preventing births. The report also concludes Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Isaac Herzog, and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant deliberately incited genocide.
Now, before I continue, I need to give you guys a view from the other side of the hill. I certainly do not have the time nor knowledge to fully explain Iran's political system, but I can give you a heavily oversimplified version that includes the bits relevant to this video. There are 2 major political parties, the principalists, or the hardliners, and the reformists, or the moderates. Khomeini was a hardliner, but he was willing to be pragmatic. Iran's president in 2001 was a reformist who had in fact won re-election that year. But unlike in the United States, the president is not the highest-ranking official in the country. That's the supreme leader. The supreme leader has final say on all political, religious, and military matters, including foreign policy. Unlike in America, Iran's president is not the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, including the infamous IRGC. So while Khatami wanted to improve relations with Washington, he faced a lot of internal opposition, and needed an undeniable display of goodwill from Washington to overcome it.
הפעל את דמיונך אם חלילה היה להם קטיושה 122 מילימטר בתוך שטחי הרשות הפלסטינאית, טווח 20 קילומטר, להיכן הם היו יכולים להגיע.
In January of 2002, the Israelis seized the Karine A ship which they claimed was carrying Iranian weapons headed to the Palestinian Authority. Iran's foreign ministry and the Palestinian Authority both denied this, and some observers claimed the entire thing was fabricated by Israel to sabotage rapprochement. This assertion is probably correct in terms of the motive, although not the culprit. It was more likely the IRGC, who also opposed improving relations between America and Iran. Whoever was responsible for the operation, it definitely succeeded. Powell was put on the back foot, and the recent half-victory in Afghanistan convinced the neoconservatives that America was invincible and didn't need to collaborate with anyone. If there was any doubt left where Bush stood on Iran, his State of the Union address that month dispelled it.
North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens. Iran aggressively pursues these weapons and exports terror, while an unelected few repress the Iranian people's hope for freedom. Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade. This is a regime that has already used poison gas to murder thousands of its own citizens, leaving the bodies of mothers huddled over their dead children. This is a regime that agreed to international inspections, then kicked out the inspectors. This is a regime that has something to hide from the civilized world. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world.
This is the part some of you are probably waiting for. The most significant effect of the speech was the preliminary justification for invading Iraq, but its impact on Iran is what I will focus on. It convinced the Ayatollah that America wasn't serious about improving relations, and that nothing could be gained through discussion. It also undermined Khatami's credibility, put the reformists on the back foot, emboldened the hardliners, and threatened to make the president a lame duck less than a year into his second term. The neoconservatives, who couldn't care less about Iranian politics, didn't care that they were undermining the best opportunity to improve relations between Washington and Tehran in a generation. They were in the driver's seat, and their vision of American troops marching through cities across the Middle East was getting closer to becoming reality. But in spite of the rhetoric coming from the United States, the majority of Iranians above the age of 15 still supported a policy of rapprochement, and Bush would unintentionally provide the reformists with one last Hail Mary in the spring of 2003.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
One of the Bush administration's war aims in Iraq was to provide a credible demonstration of American military power and a willingness to use it, particularly to intimidate Iran and North Korea. And it worked, at first. In the 80s, Iran had failed to topple Saddam in 8 years. In 2003, the United States did so in 3 weeks. American power and prestige in the Middle East soared to heights it hadn't reached in decades. The shockwaves from the fall of Baghdad reverberated through Tehran, and rapprochement was back on the table. The possibility that the US would turn against Iran next motivated even some hardliners to reconsider détente. In early May, the Expediency Council, the Supreme Leader's top advisory board, voted in favor of restoring diplomatic relations with America. The Foreign Ministry, Khatami, and Khomeini tried to reach a quote-unquote grand bargain with the United States. A letter sent to the State Department through the Swiss embassies in Tehran and Washington in May contained a list of proposals approved by the Ayatollah to normalize relations between the two countries and resolve all major issues they had with each other. Iran was willing to make extensive concessions if America was willing to pay the price. Recognize the Islamic Republic's legitimacy, accept a dialogue on the basis of mutual respect, drop the sanctions, stop the hostile behavior towards Iran, let Iran into the World Trade Organization, let Iran have access to peaceful nuclear technology, clamp down on anti-Iranian terrorist groups such as the MEK, and respect Iranian security concerns in the Middle East. In exchange, Iran would fully cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency to ensure transparency, cooperate with the United States against al-Qaeda, cooperate to establish a secular democracy in Iraq, pressure Hezbollah in Lebanon to abandon violence, end support for Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in Palestine, and accept a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The letter also outlined how to proceed with negotiations, starting with simultaneous statements that both countries were ready to talk, and a meeting to establish several working groups, including a joint forum on stabilizing Iraq. In my humble opinion, the president would need to have been a real dumbass to reject an offer like this.
Fool me once. Shame on you. It fooled me, we can't get fooled again.
Powell remarked that, quote, "It was a good memo. I couldn't sell it at the White House." By then, his political capital was rapidly diminishing. It was Rumsfeld, Cheney, and neoconservatives who held the power, and they wanted war, not negotiations. In May 2003, it still seemed like Iraq would turn out fine, and the hubris that fueled the war had not faded. Instead of targeting the MEK, which the United States had designated as a terrorist organization, Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz wanted to use the MEK to foment uprisings in Iran. Bush asked General Jay Garner, quote, "Hey Jay, you want to do Iran?" The rise of the Iraqi insurgency stretched the US military thin across two countries, one of which was descending into anarchy. This meant that the wars with Iran and Syria that the neoconservatives wanted weren't going to happen anytime soon. But it also, alongside the rejection of the Grand Bargain, destroyed the possibility of détente and discredited Khatami and the reformists. The shock and awe inspired by the initial victories had faded. The fall of Saddam's anti-Iranian regime, the power vacuum that replaced him, and the destruction of American prestige provided new opportunities for Tehran to expand its political influence across the Middle East. Iran began to set up proxy militias in Iraq that fought against the United States. In 2005, the principalists were swept back into power, and Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the insane Holocaust denier and 9/11 truther, became president. Of course, I can't end this video without commenting on more recent events.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people.
I started doing the preliminary research for this script about a week before the war began, so I can't help but look at it through the lens of what could have been. In Sarkasmatron's video speculating about Kamala's foreign policy, he noted a misconnections pattern in Iranian-American relations. I can't think of a more dramatic misconnection than the one between Bush and Khatami. At a time when Iran's ultimate political and religious authority in the country agreed with his reformist president that the great Satan deserved another chance, the United States was led by incompetent warmongers too obsessed with regime change wars to notice the incredible diplomatic opportunity they had been presented with. Reconciliation between America and Iran is probably out of the question for at least a generation. The war that Trump started has likely killed the notion of a deal, let alone a restoration of diplomatic relations. It won't matter who's president in either country anymore. Iran's will never pursue a deal with America because it will be political suicide. On top of that, the prospects for Iran becoming a more free society is also off the table for at least a few decades. Reformist efforts to promote democratization, freedom of expression, religious tolerance, women's rights, and reintegration of Iran into the international community all failed, and the Bush administration shares at least some of the blame for that. Khatami's legacy in the West is going to be defined by this meme rather than anything related to the man himself.
This civilization is best described by the renowned French sociologist Alexis de Tocqueville, who spent some 2 years in the United States in the 19th century and wrote the valuable book entitled Democracy in America, which I am sure most Americans have read.
And I can't think of a better note to end this video on. I'm the Counterfactor, and thanks for watching.
Big bang bang roll, got cheat codes. Certified in the hood, boy, they all know. Don't be asking y'all this, you gotta know to know. Got a pocket full of cash, so the whole boat. See, I've been thugging since a young and I ain't got a bang. My name been ringing bells, he talking like folks, ain't he? Been stacking from all of the dope fiends. And I ain't tripping, y'all can get it, yeah.